Hello, everybody. Welcome to Monday Night Live. My name's Derek Arden, and tonight I'm delighted to welcome Mark Ridley. Mark's the author of 3 books and has written the Leader's Secret Code. But first of all, I'm going to hand you over to Nancy Loates-Taylor, a long-time guest of Monday Night Live, to formally introduce Mark, because Nancy's known Mark for 20 years. Over to you, Nancy.
Well, thank you, Derek. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those of us in Western Europe, and good morning for all of you calling in from the States. So lovely to hear from you. Anyway, today's session is about the Leader's Secret Code, which is Mark Ridley's 3rd book. He's going to tell you all about it. I've known Mark, as Derek says, for 20 years. We've worked together as colleagues in a firm called Transform People International when we first started out, and then went into renaming. When was that, Mark? 2016, 17, somewhere around there.
Something like
to
that.
Transform Performance, and has real relevance to the book too. He'll link that in. Anyway, but Mark's got an interesting background. Started off in financial. Oh, actually, further back. We won't go back to the retail, will we? No.
Quill pens. Yeah.
Yeah. But he did work in financial services for a while, and then in the technology world, and then decided to start a development company with his partner, Ian Mills. And that's where I first met him in terms of doing business performance improvement work. And so we've had an interesting journey, haven't we, Mark? And what I'm going to do is hand over to Mark, ask him a few questions along the way, and he's going to share with us really what prompted them to do this research and what's come out of it, because it is really interesting, so much so that I became an accredited Leader's Secret Code coach and facilitator myself as well. Anyway, Mark, first of all, tell us about what prompted you to get involved in TPI and then into doing the Leader's Secret Code. Over to you.
Well, I'd be interested to also understand what the motivations of the folks on the call is as well, because I don't want this to be a sort of speech by me. But for me, an interest in leadership began, I suppose, many years ago when I realized, and please don't ring your bell at me, Derek, but I realized that a lot of leadership that I was experiencing wasn't really very good. And I suppose as a youngster, you sort of, you don't really sort of think about it in a logical and rational frame. You just get a sense that something doesn't feel quite right. You don't feel connected, and so on and so forth. And you mentioned, our colleague Ian, Nancy, and that's one of the reasons why I began this business. I just got so frustrated with a lot of what I was experiencing that I felt that there had to be something more. And that's when, as you know, we established the business Transform People. I just hold the belief that when given the opportunity, most people will come to work and will build a career with a view in mind that they want to be the best version of themselves. They may not put it into that kind of frame, but I've never really met many people who wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to go to work and be rubbish at what I do, or cause mayhem, or be deliberately nasty. I just don't see that way. So for me, the Leader's Secret Code, the whole essence of what Transform Performance is about is just really working with people, understanding their intent, understanding why they do what they do, not just what they do. Mm-hmm. And when you have the privilege to be able to do it with the likes of, some fairly global names, that's great. But at the end of the day, the label over the door doesn't matter. You could be in Cisco one week, Dow Chemical the next, British Business Bank the week after that. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with people who are going through different things and different stages in life. And obviously over the last 2 years, no one needs reminding us to the importance, I think, of good leadership. So I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, that's the motivation. I mean, I'm just interested in some of the names I see in some of you folks. I mean, what gets you interested in leadership? I mean, Alex, you're you were introduced to me as a leader of people. I mean, what about yourself? What gets you motivated about leadership?
Everybody's on mute, Mark, so it might take a minute to unmute.
Sorry,
is Alex there?
Is Alex there?
He may just be.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, I'll throw the question open because it'll help me as I answer these questions from Nancy. I mean, what about yourself, Paul?
I think leadership to me is, I think it's everywhere, more than we think, really. I think everything that we do at whatever level we're at in an organization. I mean, bearing in mind that all my career has revolved really until recent years in the corporate environment through banking and such like, and the hierarchy of that. But I think everybody has that opportunity to be a leader in their own particular area. And I like that, the point about this, that you say about this, be the best version of yourself, because to me, I've always worked on the basis that you lead by example. And if you've got the right ideas and the right way of doing things, you hope that people will follow. But it's never as simple as that. But I do feel that leadership is not just for the obvious leaders. I think we all have a role to play.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm really glad I came to you next then, because actually you've half answered why we got into what we were doing around the leader's secret code. We felt very strongly that if we were able to interview, to ask enough leaders around the world, we might get some interesting answers about what leadership meant to them and how it framed their thinking patterns, their thought patterns, and how that then worked to enable them to behave in particular ways. And what we essentially ended up doing, I'd like to say, is almost what we'll call a modeling project. If we could provide people with almost a blueprint for what leadership might be like, might feel like, might sound like, might look like, then other people, if they so chose, could follow it. And that's why we called it the leader's secret code. I mean, I don't know, I don't want to pretend that I am some guru who has all the theories here. I don't. What I've got is some interesting research. Yeah. So let me just ask the question here. Is anybody familiar with the work of Robert Dilts?
Yeah. From
Right.
NLP, from NLP.
Exactly. Now, I'm not going to go into the whys and wherefores and virtues of NLP, but I'm a big follower of Robert Dilts, and if anybody hasn't read some of his work, I'd really recommend it. But Nancy, you asked me a minute ago what prompted the journey, and this was, you remember this because you were part of the team at the time. This was absolutely central to the way it was, what we were realizing was going on in a number of the organizations, or not going on in a number of the organizations that we were working with. Nancy, would you mind if I shared a slide?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Just for those, I'm going to be very unprofessional now, and I'm not going to put it into slideshow view because I'm going to because what I didn't want to do is give you all death by PowerPoint. But what I did want to do is just to share a couple of things. I'm just going to put this into. Yeah,
it's up. Why focus on beliefs? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the work of Dilts, then that's fine. But this is, in a nutshell, this is why we were so interested in what we meant by the leader's secret code. And Robert Dilts talks a lot about what he calls logical levels of impact and influence. And this was central to our thinking when we began looking at what could it be that we could perhaps almost bottle in terms of what great leadership might be like. And what basically Dilts says is that all of us in our lives and our work are seeking some kind of desired outcome, an ideal state. And the way that we create that ideal state is usually when we are fully congruent with what we call these different levels of impact. So if we look down towards the bottom there, the environment, the context in which we work, and it can be very basic, as I've put on the slide there. But if you think about it, if you're a leader leading an organization, this is how I use it. If I'm a leader leading an organization, one of the first questions I ask is, well, what are you trying to achieve? And how does the leadership environment, how does the climate, the culture that you are creating as a leader, how does that work to deliver what your belief in that desired state is? So that's why I think the point that was made a moment ago about leadership, leaders being a great example wherever they are in the organization is so crucial, because you might be leading a large team, you might be leading a small team, but if you as a leader are not creating the right environment for your people, maybe psychological safety, challenging, innovative, whatever epithet you want to put on it, then you're not going to achieve it. And this fascinated me. It has done for years, in terms of, well, if you're going to create that environment, surely if I go up to the top levels there, that sense of identity and purpose, why do I do what I do? What is it that I'm doing as a leader day in, day out, that serves to show others why I am here? And these levels, to me, build up to this whole idea around the fact that actually, if you think about it, the beliefs and the values we hold are critical, especially for leaders, because if there is a break in this chain, if a leader doesn't really understand why they do what they do and the impact it has on their behaviors, then we have a problem. And to me, whilst this isn't my theory, what I really wanted to understand was, has anybody gone out there and researched the belief systems of leaders around the world and given them the opportunity to think about what they believe and how that leads to certain behaviors? And to me, that's where the leader's secret code came in, because we're so inextricably linked. As far as I'm concerned, it's about the 3 Bs. As we believe, we will behave, and as we behave, we will become. And for me, that was the essence of what we were trying to do. There's a little story I often share, which was a true story for me, and it was brought home to me just a few years ago when I was researching the book, and I happened to go on holiday to Sri Lanka. I don't know if anybody on the call has been, but in Sri Lanka there's an elephant orphanage, which we visited on the road to Kandy. And if you've never been to Sri Lanka, I do recommend it. I noticed that we're allowed to go up and pet the animals and all this kind of stuff. And I noticed that one of the animals that we were allowed to go close to had a rope bracelet around one of its ankles. And I said to the keeper, why is it got a rope bracelet? And he said, he smiled and he said, well, it's because when they first come into us as orphaned elephants, we put them on a chain, and it's quite a short chain. And he said, often we get criticized because the do-gooders around the world say that we're being cruel to the animals. But in actual fact, what we're doing is we're just giving them a sense of security. And then we give them gradually a longer and longer chain until in the end, we just give them the bracelet. But the beauty of it is, of course, that the elephants don't wander. But I thought, it's a really good metaphor for what we're trying to do in terms of the leader's secret code, because sometimes the beliefs that we gather as we go through our leadership journey become quite fixed. And as the guy said, well, at the end of the day, the elephants get, come to believe that there is no escape. I thought, yeah, sometimes with leaders that might be the same way. And that's really, Nancy, why we went off and researched it, because at the end of the day, if we can shine a light for leaders on what they're believing, maybe we can offer them new choices in the kind of beliefs that they hold, and that is all to the good.
Yeah, that's why the leader's secret code so intrigues me, Mark, is because it is about choices, and it's giving people choices, and it's getting them to see some of the leadership beliefs across a spectrum. And so there isn't just one model of doing it this way or that way. There's a spectrum there, and some will work better in some environments than others. And where are you on that spectrum in each of the different areas, which you're going to introduce everybody to?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because you know, one of the things, I don't know what it's been like for you folks. I mean, Paul mentioned, you know, you had a corporate life and leadership. One of the things that I object to strongly has been put into a box by anybody. And especially when you're in a role of leadership, because leadership is so situational. How on earth do you really say what great leadership is? Because in any one moment, a great leader might have to be quite, I'll use the word dictatorial, and in another moment, that same leader may have to be very participative and very social in the way that they work. So, for me, the way in which we went about this was to really think about, as you say, Nancy, what kind of spectrum of beliefs can we identify? And to cut a long story very, very short, we worked with a number of researchers, a number of psychometricians. I won't bore you with the details of those, but if you're interested, please read the book. But there is something called the Cross-National Time Series Data Archive, and basically this is something that's open to academics the world over. Fundamentally, it's a massive repository of data, and in that repository, Nancy, there are over 700,000 items at the time written about leadership. And basically, we did some number crunching, we did some analysis of the kind of subjects that leaders talked about, that wrote about, and so on and so forth. And in the end, what that basically did was enable us to create a pretty detailed questionnaire survey that we sent out to over 1,000 leaders around the world in 17 countries. And again, I don't know if any of you are experts in research on here, and you may be far more expert than me, but the psychometricians and the data analysts that we were working with, when I said, well, how many people do we need to really interview to get something sensible, to get something realistic and repeatable? They said, actually, if you do a few hundred, you're probably going to over-egg the pud. After a certain time, there's a limit to how many answers you're going to get back. Okay, fine. But we went for just over 1,000. So the analysis, Nancy, is based on 1,000 leaders in 17 countries and 11 different vertical markets. So from that perspective, pretty comprehensive. And these were the 7 focus areas that we asked them questions about, because these were the areas that not only in interviews came up time and time again, but when we looked at the work from the results of the Cross-National Time Series Data Archive, you could absolutely categorize so much of what was written into these key areas here. You know, leaders have to be resilient, they have to influence, they have to communicate well, they have to empower, they have to understand strategy, they have to understand what it means to control, and they have to be ready to, or understand what it means to be fulfilled.
Mark, can you reduce the size of that slide? We can only see 2 of those 7 points.
I can see it all.
Okay,
yeah.
Maybe that's me then. Okay, if everybody else
is anybody else struggling? No.
There's been
see it all. Okay, that's good.
Mark, there's been a question.
Yes.
You know, how did you define leadership?
Right. Really good question. We went out and asked anybody who was responsible for the direction of others, who according to their organization could be an agent of change in that organization. So it wasn't specifically management responsibility. It was people who also recognized themselves as a leader rather than a manager. We did quite a lot of work in the early stages sifting out the difference between leaders and managers. So really good question. But in the end, we concluded that, you know, anybody who was somebody who could create followership could justifiably call themselves a leader. So it's a very broad brush, you know, so how do you define it? So yeah, great question. Are there any other questions in the chat, Nancy, that I'm missing?
Let's just see.
Yeah.
Where do you see critical thinking become integrated into your model so it becomes a practice rather than a process?
Critical thinking? Well, critical thinking you could argue is a skill and a behavior, not necessarily a belief, although if you believe that critical thinking is important. So arguably the behavior or skill of critical thinking, well, I'll leave you to judge where it would fit within the code. It's a great question. But I don't think it's a belief.
For the minute and go deeper and then come back to it. Yeah.
So fundamentally, by the way, I should say that we also, and we highlight them in the book, we validated a lot of the information that came out of the research by going to a number of people that we called iconics, and we highlight each of these in the book. So again, it was a very useful process for us. For example, we talked about football earlier. The leadership experience of somebody like Sarah Abanja, who is the CEO of the Tottenham Hotspur Foundation, is very different from, say, Bruce Daisley, who was at the time the president of Twitter, or the current, for example, Max Hill, Director of Public Prosecutions, or, for example, somebody who comes from a different world, such as somebody like Alexander Altinger, who comes from a different world, or somebody like oh, she's coming over here now, Varda Shine, here we go, who comes from Israel originally and is from De Beers. So we tried very hard to get a cross-section of these leaders that we could use to validate the research that was coming out. And again, they very much did. There was no argument as to the areas that we had identified from the research in terms of the 7 areas of focus. And they all found resonance in the belief system. So what were those belief systems? Well, fundamentally, those 7 areas of focus that we'd identified as from the Cross-National Time Series data archive as areas of real interest for leaders and focus for leaders, we looked at those, and the questionnaire that we put, it was about 500 questions that we put. Nancy, you mentioned a spectrum. What we did was we said, well, let's ask questions that relate to those different areas of focus. So resilience, you could ask questions relating to, the degree to which I don't know, the degree to which I spring back after a period of adversity. Or you could ask questions relating to, is resilience about having tenacity? Is it about working smart? Is it just simply about working hard? A whole range of questions that we asked. And what this identified for us was what we call journey motivators. In other words, what we realized was that every leader recognized that they were on a journey of their own, and they were taking their people on a journey, but the way in which they get there differs greatly. And that was really important, because whilst leaders coalesced around those 7 views, those 7 destination beliefs, as we came to call them, the way they get there is very, very different. Actually, Robert Dilts, going back to his work, he has a very simple way of putting it. He always talks about the fact that, the map, in a sense, is not the territory. That if you invite someone to look at a map, that people will always find different ways of getting to the same destination, but it doesn't make the journey any less relevant, whether you go via the mountains or whether you go via the valleys. So that's really what we ended up with: journey motivators and destination beliefs. And here is an example. I'm not going to bore you with all of it today unless you're really interested to ask all the questions, but here is an example. In the research, when we asked questions about strategy, every leader that we interviewed agreed that it was important, first of all, that strategy was part of a leader's belief system and thinking about that. But they all agree that it's knowing where the organization has to position itself, how to implement its resources to achieve success, and so on and so forth. When we interviewed in detail a lot of leaders, and we said, well, how do you get there? It was quite surprising how many people would say, well, you know what? I've been around the block. I know what the answer is. Or, well, I know my industry. I have a sense of intuition. I was actually surprised how often leaders said that to me. When we did the research, as you can see here, when we allocate 20 points, as it were, the leaders came out with a balance. So it was not about being exclusive one to the other, but most leaders said, no, I prefer to understand that strategy and strategic thinking has to be rooted in insight and research to make my outcomes more predictable. But at the same time, I recognize that if I'm going to be a successful leader, an element of what I do has got to be based upon my intuition. So if you can think about this now, knowing that that is where top quartile leaders place this emphasis of belief. So it's not about one or the other. Now you can see that if we have a conversation and I put a load of leaders through this and I get a load of leaders who come out, I don't know, 16 intuitive and 4 fact-based, then we can have some conversations about why they're holding those kinds of beliefs. So what we're trying to do here, Nancy, is to make soft stuff around the way in which people balance beliefs into something that provides hard data so that leadership coaches can have some sensible conversations about someone's leadership practice.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yes.
I mean, this is the code itself. So you can see those 7 areas that we looked at. And when we look, you can go into sub-beliefs to the nth degree, but we chose in the end to go with these beliefs because, as you rightly say, they present a spectrum. So as a leader, I'll ask everybody on the call to think about it now. When you think about being in control, which most leaders recognize that at the end, they were accountable for success, there has to be a degree of control. Do you tend to the participative? Do you tend to being more directive? And you can see here that top quartile leaders from the survey said, well, actually, on balance, we're more participative. But I was slightly surprised, I'll be honest, at the level of directedness. I thought in this modern age, I might be an old fuddy-duddy, and it might be much more towards the participative. I don't know if anyone has any views on that.
Where's the directiveness? I'm lost a bit on that slide. Forgive me. Maybe
so you can see on the slide if you look at the word control.
Yeah. So that's 8
yeah.
and 12 directive.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I live with this day in, day out, and you don't. So thank you for that. So you can see there that the way that these were split. Resilience was an interesting one, and still proves to be an interesting one because, and again, you can see there that when we looked at leaders saying resilience is how I spring back from adversity. I use it as a springboard for future success. So many leaders said to us in the research, look, at the end of the day, you have to put in a shift when things go awry. You have to work hard. But what was really interesting was the degree to which people said, I accept I have to work hard, but actually I have to be innovative and creative and I have to think smartly and so on and so forth. To the extent that very often when we're working with leaders at the moment, we're finding that a lot of leaders will say to us quite openly, do you know something? I think that there are times when I don't give me or myself or my team the credit for doing a hard day's work. It's just suddenly becomes something that's expected of us. And a lot of leaders are saying at the moment, I'm finding that I need to think a little more carefully because you can see here that it wasn't a necessarily strongly held belief about working hard in relative terms to working smart. But in fact, it's really interesting that many leaders say, it's not that I don't believe in working hard, it's that I'm not recognizing it in myself. And am I recognizing it in my people? I had a leader from Microsoft just the other week, and he looked at his scores, and he came out 19 points work smart, 1 point work hard, and his team said, "Boss, that doesn't surprise us because if we're going to give you the feedback, you're pushing us to be innovative and creative, but actually you're exhausting us. You're not giving us time to recover." So, again, you can see that when you have these conversations with leadership groups, you can start to see, is the environment that people are experiencing commensurate with the leader's beliefs and they're driving it in a certain direction? And is it always appropriate?
Mark, if I can come in
Yeah.
there, there's a comment in the chat here from Alex. He says, I feel that where you position on these scales can be situation and people dependent. And I mean, you talked about that at the first two.
Yeah.
For example, sometimes more directive is necessary, at other times it's necessary to be more participative.
Couldn't agree more. And the interesting thing for this is, remember, we said at the start, what I wanted to do with this research was to show leaders that they do have choices. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
And when you get somebody who balances these beliefs, such as these top quartile leaders are doing, then the chances are they're going to give themselves those choices. What is interesting, Nancy, is, as you know, because you coach people in this, will very often get people who, let's take influencers, the next one, let's move on.
Yeah. Notice
Notice how top quartile leaders balance that transactional leadership with transformational leadership. I actually was surprised at that, because again, I thought, well, the way that, you know, the modern sort of parlance is, transformational leadership would be absolutely out there, way and above, but actually it isn't. So, you know, this is about knowing when to apply the right thing. And here's the thing: if you don't hold a belief, the likelihood is that you won't display that behavior because it's not on the radar.
Yeah.
So, you know, I couldn't agree more with the person who says it is situational. And what we're trying to do with this is to say, think about the choices you have moment by moment as a leader. When they do the psychometric, they will be shown where they are at a moment in time. And what we, as you know, Nancy, we encourage people to think about is, so what's going on in your world at the moment that's caused you to give those scores?
Yeah.
You know, I remember the first time I did this, you know, going to the bottom of this, my achievement score, personally, my achievement score came out at 9. And I did the research, and I was supposed to know better, supposedly. But, you know,
can you give people a feel for just a quick snapshot of what the issue is there on fulfillment? Because it's that achievement.
Yeah.
You know, why are you criticizing yourself for 9, or holding the belief that you could have done a better job there in the spread of your scores?
Yeah, achievement orientation goes, I suppose, towards individualism, power, and control.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to be hard about it. So if you show an excess of achievement orientation, based on this research, the likelihood is therefore that you will not be showing quite as much affiliation. In other words, a sense of fulfillment through enabling others to succeed.
Yeah.
Whereas achievement orientation is much more about, well, a sense of fulfillment through what I achieve and the recognition I get. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with that, because there will be moments in our lives when we want to be more achievement orientated. All we're saying here is that from the leader's perspective, the top quartile leaders out of those 1,000 surveyed said, actually, we believe that this is the balance that is making us successful currently. So when I beat myself up about coming out 9 points of full achievement and only 11 points affiliation, what I did was I said, okay, so why is that happening? What is going on for me? It didn't make me a bad person or necessarily a bad leader. But what it enabled me to do is to have a conversation with myself and say, do I want to be more affiliative? Do I actually? Well, I asked my colleagues. I said, am I all sort of all talk and all me and not about you? And I got some reassuring feedback. But you know what it's like, Nancy. You know, something like this, I hope, gives people a sense of greater self-awareness and other awareness.
Yeah, and using it with clients as we're doing at the moment. What have you found has, you know, because this is interesting research, and taking it into client projects on leadership development. Just give us a sense of, but yeah, I think you just had that. How are organizations benefiting from using this research?
I mean, again, I don't want to, I'm going to go through a lecture on this, but look, at the moment, there is no doubt that what we are seeing now is leaders wherever we're working. I mean, we're running the Leaders Secret Code as a program for probably 4 organizations at the moment. And one of them is in the well, I've already mentioned the name. One of them is in the tech sector. Another one is in the rental space. People in America and the UK may have heard of Sunbelt Rentals. We're currently running a leadership program for them, the Leader Secret Code. Now, what we're seeing here is organizations are absolutely looking for something that helps connect leaders with their people, especially after what's happened to us all over the last 2 years. And, you know, I've called it a VUCA 2.0 environment. We always knew that the world was volatile and complex and ambiguous, but I think now more than ever before, especially in this world where so many leaders now are not physically connected to their people, helping people understand their own people a little more has been of massive benefit. And I think, you know, these questions are getting asked of us by clients all the time. How do we keep our people engaged? How do I enable our leaders to motivate and inspire, often from a distance? How do we help people stay resilient? What is the pattern for good leadership or great leadership, and can you help? And so on and so forth. So I think all of those are fairly self-evident. And I think the other thing for us that is coming out of this is a whole range of work around data analytics and benchmarking. Now, at the end of the day, how do you measure? How do you bottle great leadership? It's a challenge, you know, because as we already said, it's so situational. But again, because we've now got, well, I mean, the original survey was 1,000 leaders, but I would, you know, we're now well on the way towards 10,000 leaders in the database now. What we're able to start doing now is to start doing some data analytics, and some organizations are starting to say to us, can you help us think about what good might look like for us? And again, some organizations aren't. Some organizations are saying, no, we're quite happy with the benchmark that you've got, and that's fine. All we want is to give people a conversation. But some organizations are starting to say, well, if we're running a leadership academy, you know, what beliefs might be important to us? Would we necessarily see the same beliefs that you guys have identified in the code? Well, could you work with us to work on some of the beliefs that are important to us? Yeah. And we're finding that a lot. Yeah.
Great. Well, Mark, shall we hit the pause button there and see if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask?
Nancy, can I just butt in there? I'd like to take the questions after we stop the recording, because we've been going for 40 minutes. So
I just came up and chat.
So Nigel, could I possibly come back to you on something you've put out? Couldn't agree more. The Cynefin framework is fantastic. And indeed, when we help leaders deal with ambiguity and all that kind of stuff, and the taking the sense of their environment, that's a great way. I mean, I wonder if you want to just share a little bit with that, because to me, that was also fundamental in driving some of the research that we undertook.
Nigel, if you can do that in about 30 seconds, because we're really short of time, and then we can cover it after I stop the recording.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay. It's okay, Mark. It's just that we are. Let's do that after the recording. Nancy, thanks for hosting.
Glad to help out. Thank you, Mark. That was really interesting. I think Derek might have another point.
Mark, I wanted to thank you on behalf of Monday Night Live and on behalf of the guests for giving us an amazing talk, actually. And we'd like to invite you back at some stage, because I think we've got so many questions for you that we need to fire at you. But I would just ask you for one last tip for people watching this on YouTube, on my podcast channel, that you think they ought to take away for 2022, because we are actually all leaders. Everyone's a leader in some description or other. One last tip, please, Mark.
It might sound a bit trite, but I really believe in don't limit your ambition. That's the tip I would have. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, I'd never written a book. 5 years ago, I'd never done any meaningful research. 5 years later, we put our minds to it. We have an understanding of what the salesperson secret code looks like, the leader secret code looks like. And the wonderful thing about it is that ambition has driven a whole new conversation with a whole load of people I never thought I would meet. So the more ambitious you are, the more you make something happen, the more likely you are to meet interesting people like you've seen on the call here today. So that would be it. Don't let anything stop you, just do it.
Thanks, Mark. That's a fantastic tip. It reminds me of Henry Ford, or was it Edison? Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're probably right. Mark Ridley, thanks for joining Monday Night Live.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that. If you're watching this on YouTube on the Negotiators podcast, please join us live. Please like it. Please pass it on to your friends, and please recommend Mark Ridley's The Leader's Secret Code. Thanks again, Mark.
Welcome.